তারেক রহমান সশস্ত্র চিত্রে
শপথ করিতেছি যে
A lot of action-packed 4 months for Tarique Rahman in Bangladesh.
Firstly, I would give him more time, Smita. In terms of dealing with some of the externally imposed challenges, I think Tarique Rahman has done pretty well.
Domestic reforms he has been talking about, whether it's cutting down on bureaucracy or no new imported vehicles for lawmakers. Does it strike a right note?
Look, this is a country which has a history of being poor, and that is precisely why BNP was voted back into power and not Jamaat or NCP, right? People were looking for stability, people were looking for someone who can govern, someone who can bring the economy back. The elections after almost 2 decades were the most credible, clear, participatory elections. I think there is no doubting about that. This government, unlike the United Kingdom's government in Bangladesh, will actually last its entire term, and I'm happy about that. The political life of Sheikh Hasina as the leader of Awami League, in my personal view, is over. In a year, in 2 years, 3 years, I can foresee this happening, where Awami League is actually, even from outside, perhaps shaping the narrative of Bangladesh if something goes south.
It's in the next election when these questions of whether Bangladesh has really democratized that idea that democracy needs to thrive in here. How long will a honeymoon period for Tarique Rahman really last when it comes to Jamaat's assertions within parliament with perhaps more fundamental ideas?
The performance of the opposition, Jamaat and NCP, over the last 4 months, they have taken a very, very cautious, very hands-off approach.
Tarique Rahman has been very, very insistent that we will have an independent foreign policy, neither aligning with India or China or any of the big powers.
Where the Chinese are saying, we will help you do dredging, and we'll basically allow flood control, all those sort of infrastructural activities that you require on Teesta, which is a politically sensitive issue with the Indians, of course. I think Sheikh Hasina was very clear that politically she was close to New Delhi, but strategically she was very, very invested in Beijing. In terms of structural salience and strengths and resilience, Bangladesh is much more powerful than Pakistan in terms of its own merits, right?
A Hindu minority killed, mob lynched in Bangladesh is as worrisome as India mistreating its own minority.
The lack of public trust. Now, this goes back to the very fundamentals of the subcontinent and the fact that this is a subcontinent which is still partitioned.
Hello and a warm welcome to another edition of the Foreign Policy Dialogue, the podcast where we bring you deep dive conversations on issues of global, regional importance. I'm Smita Sharma, and today we discuss the country in our neighborhood, something where there's a lot to unpack. I'm talking about Bangladesh, and I do know for sure that we have a lot of viewers, audience who tune into my YouTube channel from Bangladesh as well. So namaskar to all of you who are watching this conversation. There's Tarique Rahman, who took charge as the Prime Minister of Bangladesh in elections held February earlier this year that we covered on the ground. And since then, we have seen not just an attempt at serious reset of ties with India, his visit to China, and overall what's happening within Bangladesh also with the Jamaat and NCP in opposition. To make sense of all the events and what's happening, I have with me Avinash Paliwal, who joins me from London today. He is a professor at the Department of Politics and International Studies at SOAS University of London. He's also a non-resident scholar at Carnegie, a prolific writer. You can read his bylines often. An author of 2 books, including the latest one, which was India's Near East. Many thanks, Avinash, for joining me here in this conversation today.
Thank you for having me here, Smita.
Before I hop on to Bangladesh, how is Britain doing? I think the cabbage has really been the longest lasting prime minister that UK has had so far.
Yes, we will have a new prime minister in a couple of weeks, and yeah, I've lost count. This is the 7th prime minister in about a decade. Elections will happen in a couple of years. So yes, there has been a lot of political tumult in the United Kingdom. A lot of economic question marks about where the economy is headed, big questions on strategic affairs given UK's historical kind of relations with United States, but also very deep equities with Europe. And right now we are tending towards Europe, even though we cannot let go of America. So we are right bang in the middle of all the kind of global rifts and turmoil that you see.
Of course, the only difference being that UK doesn't keep going into direct election mode every time, because it's just the head of the ruling party that takes over as the as the prime minister. There's that peaceful transition that does happen. But Avinash, so looking back in those days in February when you saw those elections, and from then to now we are talking about July, a lot of action-packed 4 months for Tarique Rahman in Bangladesh. How do you evaluate his first few months in office? He seems to have made all the right noises so far.
I think this is a prime minister in consolidation mode, if you ask me. The bottom line of the first few months of Tarique Rahman's prime minister, his tenure as prime minister of Bangladesh, has been to, one, consolidate the party, consolidate government, make sure that the bureaucracy is responsive, the bureaucracy is effective, and all of that is happening right in the middle of a war which happened. And of course, I mean, for now there is a ceasefire in the West Asian conflict between US, Israel, and Iran. But the very direct after effects, the second and third order effects on Bangladeshi economy, the people of Bangladesh, many of whom are living in the Gulf as part of the Bangladeshi kind of diaspora. So he has had his hands full, really. And I do believe that he, in terms of dealing with some of the externally imposed challenges, I think Tarique Rahman has done pretty well. He thankfully inherited an economy which was weak, but which was not in the kind of dire straits that Bangladeshi economy was, let's say, in July, August 2024, when the uprising happened, right, against Sheikh Hasina, former prime minister. So he did make sure that he used that cushion to be able to steer the country in a safer place. And I think on that count, both domestically, he has been able to stabilize the broader kind of state-citizen contract, which we saw had been broken during the Sheikh Hasina years, which was tenuous at best during the interim government years because it was a unelected party, even though it did have popular support, at least from the students and certain kind of segments of the even other segments of the Bangladeshi society, but it was still not an elected outfit. So I think he has. I would give him. Firstly, I would give him more time, Smita. I mean, it's early days. He has been able to at least kind of position himself, settle himself. I'll give him the first year to see whether he can actually make something out of the kind of electoral majority that the BNP has mustered. And most importantly, whether there are any signs of breaking away from the political economic straitjacket of the two-party kind of system that we had seen emerge in the past in Bangladesh, and will there be more space for more actors to really kick in a much more thriving electoral and economic contest inside the country?
Absolutely. I mean, one has to remember that the Bangladesh elections took place on 12, 13 Feb is when the results come out. By 20th Feb, you have the Israeli attack on Iran, and the whole world, of course, goes for a toss, whether it is on energy connectivity to all the other aspects of the war as well. So, in terms of the kind of issues that he has picked up, right from his manifesto, he has been saying that the vision is about Bangladesh first, and that's something that he's working on. So just delving into the domestic issues a little bit, do you think he has managed to take forward his new, because he was out of the country for almost 15, 16 years, his sort of alliance, his partners, the people that he trusts in, along with the old people, leaders within the BNP, has he been able to sort of bridge that gap and the kind of domestic reforms he has been talking about, whether it's cutting down on bureaucracy, whether it is no use or no new imported vehicles for lawmakers, does it strike a right note?
Look, Smita, in terms of these small tactical issues about fewer vehicles for bureaucracy and how do you kind of trim the bureaucracy and how do you run the country, I think however important and consequential these decisions may be in an operational sense, they are still not politically as salient if I have to adjudicate the performance of the BNP, right? I think there are 2 or 3 fundamentals that were being promised. That first, we'll bring stability. Second, the biggest promise that any Bangladeshi government has made to the people of Bangladesh historically has been on the economic front. That look, this is a country which has a history of being poor, and this is a country which will no more, where the people will no more be facing acute shortages moving forward. That's the fundamental thing that lubricates both, whether it was previously Awami League and the BNP today, and to a certain extent even Jamaat or NCP moving forward. That is absolutely central to the ask of the Bangladeshi electorate. And that is precisely why BNP was voted back into power and not Jamaat or NCP, right? People were looking for stability. People were looking for someone who can govern, someone who can bring the economy back on track in some senses, right? And you can see that trend emerge as part of the February elections. Now, let me respond to your question of domestic whether it's reform, whether it's performance, on 2 or 3 different issues. First, let's talk economics. Then let's talk the politics of it, right? And the third we'll talk, which is important to keep in mind, is the July Charter, which promised institutional reform of the entire Bangladeshi political machinery, the whole polity itself. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. Now, so let's start with the economics of it, right? We have mentioned the West Asian crisis. There was huge risk to now. Thankfully, the economy, the market, the energy market has rebounded after the ceasefire, but there was a huge concern about fertilizer supply, about fuel supply. This had a direct impact on the performance of the garment industry, which is absolutely central to the Bangladeshi economy, Bangladeshi export market. There were concerns about currency shocks and how the remittances which are coming into Bangladesh from Bangladeshi diaspora, whether they will translate into similar forms of economic or revenue generation, financial, for the economy moving forward. And I think as of today, I think we are looking at a healthy exchequer. The foreign exchange reserves are not dwindling. They have foreign exchange reserve, I think, if I'm correct, if I'm not wrong, about 6 months old. And I think that's a fairly healthy kind of forex reserve to have for a country like Bangladesh, right? They're much better than before. So I do think on the economics, they have been able to somewhat stabilize. And the economic story, and we'll come to it in a minute, is very deeply tied to the decision by Tarique Rahman to visit Malaysia and China in an international context. Now, if we secondly look at the political or the electoral field, I think this is where I'm most concerned, Smita. And the reason I'm concerned is not that, the elections after almost 2 decades were the most credible, clear, participatory elections. I think there is no doubting about that. It was free, it was fair. I'm under no illusion that this government, unlike the United Kingdom's government in Bangladesh, will actually last its entire term, and I'm happy about that. The concern, of course, is the big question, a sensitive question of Awami League, and not just of Sheikh Hasina. And those are 2 different questions in my mind, right? Sheikh Hasina, I think the political life of Sheikh Hasina as the leader of Awami League, in my personal view, is over. She's a very important figurehead. She's in exile. She's in India. Everyone knows that. She wants to come back. She has articulated it. But I doubt that there will be acceptability for Hasina politically, but also legally there will be many question marks given the kind of ruling that has been ushered in. And I do think that the process of that ruling was problematic. You cannot, it was done in absentia. I can understand that. But the way it went about, the death sentence has been given out, and some of the other Awami League leaders today are still being harassed. I think there are question marks about that. But talking about the party itself, the fact that in the first few months itself, the BNP has basically, at least at a national level, reduced space for the Awami League to make a comeback, reduced space for those Awami League leaders who are still in Bangladesh, who do want to assert some kind of political independence from the family, who still have aspirations and who do believe in the ideas of the Awami League and acknowledge, at least in private, that it had gone astray. They do not find space right now to make a comeback. Now, the options they have is either you join other political parties, including the BNP, or you stand as independent, but that's still not the same as Awami League making a comeback. And I think this is something which we need to keep an eye out for. I do think that Awami League is not politically done. The BNP will have to figure out what pathway it is most comfortable with for Awami League to make a comeback in a political sense. That is what will give much more equilibrium and equanimity to the political field of Bangladesh moving forward. This is not a short-term problem. Right now, no one is worried about it. But this is something that if the economy starts to kind of, stutter a bit moving forward, due to any exogenous or endogenous shocks, there is a very good chance that the anger, economic anger, will translate politically, whether it's in terms of more support for the Jamaat, but also more support for Awami League. And people are saying that, look, we need another credible alternative back into the fray, and that could be the League. So that is that is where I have the most concern. And that concern goes along with kind of certain bureaucratic changes, like, not giving the judiciary the sort of political independence that it requires, that it deserves. Those are small things which, if they become a habit, we are looking at a scenario where the BNP is kind of going back to similar practices, not in the short term, but in the medium to long term, as Awami League was, right? Just because it does not want to be out of power. The final thing I would stop is the July Charter. Look, this is an interesting case where an unelected government reintroduced, put up for referendum something which fundamentally changed the fundamentals of Bangladeshi politics, term limits, the amount of judicial independence, how parties have to run themselves, how candidates must behave. And BNP was fundamentally opposed to quite a few of those issues, accepted the July Charter, of course, but has also distanced itself from it. It wants to kind of just keep the Charter outside. And there are contradictions in that, and not because of the Charter itself, because of the point I made about the field being more inclusive in the long-term political canvas is very important. The Charter allowed that, but while also creating certain limits to power, right? And I think that is a tension that we need to be alive to moving forward. Right now, it does not seem as salient, and I agree, it's not. But in a year, in 2 years, 3 years, I can foresee this happening, where Awami League is actually, even from outside, perhaps shaping the narrative of Bangladesh if something goes south.
Yeah, and I think those are very important insights that you've shared, and I'm going to pick up some threads from these. I mean, staying on with this question of Awami League, I think it's the next election where it will really throw up, because this election, there was no doubt. Even had the Awami League been in the race, I have no doubt in my mind that it would still have been BNP which would have emerged as the clear winner, because there was substantive anger against Sheikh Hasina on the ground that we felt. I was there in August 2024 too. I was back there to cover the elections. But having said that, I think it's in the next election when these questions of whether Bangladesh has really democratized that idea that democracy needs to thrive in here, whether that has taken roots or not. And between now and then election, this question of how soon will the Jamaat and the NCP, given the Jamaat has had its best ever performance in parliament, start to assert themselves. So how long will a honeymoon period for Tarique Rahman really last when it comes to Jamaat's assertions within parliament with perhaps more fundamental ideas?
Absolutely, you're right. I mean, Awami League, you're right, that this will take one tenure for Awami League to slowly make a comeback. And in the next elections, it will really become, if at all, even if, let's assume, ENP opens the space, Awami League will also then have to take the risk of standing up and coming out. So there are dual dynamics. Right now, we see interest from Awami Leaguers, but BNP is not open to it. But tomorrow it could be that the BNP does open and the Awami League kind of fails to capitalize. But that's to be seen. But you're right on Jamaat. Look, Jamaat is playing an interesting game in my view. They have won the largest number of seats in their history in Bangladesh, but that is not sufficient enough for them to be able to shape some very core policy decisions. And this is where it finds itself in a limbo where it's politically resuscitated, has the narrative appeal as a principal opposition party, can shape the conversations quite credibly, but does not have the parliamentary kind of the political metal that you require in terms of simple seat share in the parliament to be able to shape the policy agenda the way it likes. And I think this is a contradiction that Jamaat is trying to learn how to live with and how to, of course, kind of obviate and kind of break away from by having more popularity and more seats in the next election. But I think, as you hinted, that will depend on how it performs in this term and how it performs its role as an opposition. Right now, if I'm to adjudicate the performance of the opposition, Jamaat and NCP, over the last 4 months, they have taken a very, very cautious, very hands-off approach. I think they're still trying to figure out how to play the part of a parliamentary opposition effectively. And I think they're also undergoing a sort of learning curve where core political competencies, which did not exist till this point in time, because you were almost always in the opposition, either on the streets or elsewhere, underground, you were being hounded. I think I would give them, just like Tarique Rahman, I'm giving him a year, I would give Shafiqur Rahman a year to figure out what kind of an opposition party do you truly want to be? And just like Tarique Rahman, Shafiqur Rahman is making all the right kind of noises. He's not being provocative neither towards the religious minorities in Bangladesh, nor towards countries like India. So you can at least see that the leadership at the helm of the Jamaat-e-Islami in Bangladesh, it's a mature leadership in a political sense.
But Avinash, during the elections also, it did feel like that Shafiqur had kind of outsourced that role to the younger leaders, that, there would be a good cop, bad cop from that end, that it was perhaps Nahid Islam or the younger leaders in other student outfits who would make sort of the more, provocative remarks going marching into the Indian High Commission, while Shafiqur would play it like with more of a statesmanship sort of a role.
See, yes, and I would personally not use the term outsourcing because that gives too much agency to Shafiqur Rahman taking these decisions. I think Nahid Islam, NCP, these are independent actors. Let's be very clear. Their politics, their moment, that gave them, there's a logic to their alignment with the Jamaat. There is an ideological kind of conservative canon within which the student movement had also emerged. This was not a left-wing progressive student movement. Let's be clear about that, even during the July 2004-2005 period. But I do believe that it suited Shafiqur Rahman that he didn't have to kind of whip up that sort of narrative himself. And it allowed him that space. And to be fair, he exploited that space quite effectively. Now, he could have gone, he could have completely lost out and not capitalized on that opportunity, but he did, right? And he played. And what he also realized that political communication will not happen just by him standing in front of a mic anymore. So he utilized social media, and there the younger cadre of Jamaat-e-Islami activists, not NCP, actually played a much more important role, which of course has not come out as much in the forefront of the conversation. So again, look, I'm giving both Shafiqur and Tarique the first year to see how one wants to govern and how the other one wants to oppose. But right now, I think for all the concerns one may have, this is a story of consolidation. This is a story of broadly the political leadership on both sides of the aisle learning how to have a conversation without necessarily resorting to the street. And I think that's a healthy sign, Smita, in my view.
Yeah. Okay. Let me shift the conversation a little bit, of course, to something that you touched upon, that China visit. Again, on his foreign policy front, Tarique Rahman has been very, very insistent that we will have an independent foreign policy, neither aligning with India or China or any of the big powers. You cannot come and play us like a chessboard. But we saw that crucial visit and a lot of announcements that were made. He addressed the parliament, including, announcements that said Mandarin will be a part of the third language option available in schools now, trying to build that people-to-people sort of ecosystem. There are talks about co-production of JF-17, where New Delhi would have a lot of apprehensions about if that were to actually happen. How do you look at, is it just in continuance of a past Bangladeshi policy towards China? Even, Sheikh Hasina's time, they signed up for BRI, or there is a more greater warmth that you see towards Beijing right now under Tarique?
So, very quickly, Smita, you mentioned Mandarin being taught in Bangladeshi high schools. Mandarin is the largest language being taught as the second language across the United Kingdom in schools today. So just to give you a sense of where the value of Mandarin is being seen from a global perspective, not just a regional Bangladesh perspective, the conversation on China has changed completely, right? The emotions around it, the value around it, and there is a degree of both utilitarian calculation that you should learn Mandarin because that's the language of the future in some senses, but also the fascination with the culture, right? You understand Chinese culture better. So just to put that as, I would not read too much into Bangladesh saying we want that as a third language. The world is moving in that direction. Many European countries have already moved in that direction, right? So that's one thing. Now, in terms of, look, if I have to view the canvas of continuity and change, I think there's more continuity in Bangladesh's foreign policy under Tarique Rahman than change in some senses, right? Sheikh Hasina was very clear that politically she was close to New Delhi, but strategically she was very, very invested in Beijing. That is, on New Delhi, we'll come to the Bangladesh-India relations, but Tarique Rahman has signaled very clearly that he wants to build a relationship with India. He doesn't want to break. This is not the Tarique Rahman of 2001 to 2006, right? A different personality. there is all the discontinuity. I think the change element is actually in Bangladesh's relationship with the West, especially the United States and Pakistan. I think there's a very marked difference in Dhaka's ties with Islamabad. There's an uptick in that relationship. Again, I would be very cautious not to oversell that as some sort of a Machiavellian comeback of Pakistan in Bangladesh. In fact, if you ask me today, at least in terms of structural salience and strengths and resilience, Bangladesh is much more powerful than Pakistan in terms of its own merits, right? Pakistan is playing its geography, its diplomatic cards well in the past year or past few months, but Bangladesh has much more strength to offer and much more to offer on its own merit to both Pakistan and the world, right? So that is something, again, whenever someone asks me that, oh, Pakistan is making a comeback, I'm saying, my response is, no, Bangladesh is allowing Pakistan to come back to a certain, within limits. And I think that's a fair decision from a Bangladeshi perspective. Unlike Sheikh Hasina, who had a very kind of a complicated relationship towards the West, one which was marked with political suspicion, but economic necessity, because US is also your largest kind of market for your garment exports. I think given Tarique Rahman's experience of exile in London, his outreach to the Western kind of diplomatic core, political leadership, he's very well versed in the West, in the language of the West, right? His daughter grew up effectively in the United Kingdom, right? So there is that degree of comfort and understanding where you can have a conversation, where you will not have to kind of fight ghosts all the time when you're dealing with Western sort of leaders. And I think that is another change, if I have to look at the change and continuity. Now, going back to your question of how important and warm China relationship is, look, this was the most logical thing that any prime minister of Bangladesh could have done, honestly, Smita. You have had a very difficult time with India. You're still building relationship. You are focusing on the politics of it. You're in the first phase of building trust with Delhi, but your economy cannot wait, exactly because of the reasons we discussed earlier about the West Asian crisis, the conflict, its after effects. And you need investment, you need trade. A lot of the trade that you do with the Chinese are coming with very little tariff barriers, unlike the Americans, who have put now they've kind of neutralized the tariffs to 10%. But this is an economy you cannot do without, and economy is what is your main source of success or failure moving forward, political success or failure too. So, I mean, for me, I would have been surprised had it been any other country. And trust me, this has nothing to do with, kind of making a political statement against India. I do not see this decision, this visit, as anything to do with how Bangladesh values its relationship with India. This is just a sign of the times. And you can see that, whether it is, there was a lot of 17 MOUs were signed with a lot of focus on more trade, more investment. The two things, as you hinted, one is, as you mentioned, in fact, the GF-17 kind of co-production, that idea. Now, we need to keep in mind that the Bangladeshi armed forces are primarily being equipped by Chinese tech, by Chinese kit. So in some senses, that's not new, but just having a conversation about JF-17 co-production does not mean the production of that plane is happening anytime soon, right? So let's be very clear that that's a conversation that happened because they want the defense industrial base to emerge. But I would still see that as really kind of soft signaling, having a conversation rather than any serious metal, at least in this 5-year term of Tarique Rahman. I don't foresee that happening, right? And that's simply because of how the military-industrial complex works. Even the Chinese military-industrial. Pakistan is way ahead on that count in that sector than Bangladesh is and will be anytime soon. What is more sensitive, in my view, from an Indian vantage now, is the Teesta, where the Chinese are saying, we will help you do dredging, and we'll basically allow flood control, all those sort of infrastructural activities that you require on Teesta, which is a politically sensitive issue with the Indians, of course. I think that is something which I would watch out for, because even if Bangladesh wants it to be done for just practical purposes, they need to do it, right? Someone has to do it. If they don't have the money to do it, or they don't have the skills, and the Chinese are offering you at a good kind of, with a good price tag. So this is something that India will have to be very cautious about. That for Bangladesh, it might be the easiest thing to do. For China, it might mean more than just supporting Bangladesh doing it. There's clearly a geopolitical, geoeconomic rationale to that kind of a project, right, which is aiming towards India. So this is something which I'll be keeping my eyes open for. But having said that, just to reassert, this from my vantage, this was one of the most logical kind of visits given if I have to adjudicate the situation Tarique Rahman is in domestically, regardless of what the Indian thinking may be on the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think New Delhi also has been waking up to the fact and accepting it that, the times have changed. It's not the same kind of South Asian neighborhood and the dynamics where every South Asian leader post their election would come to New Delhi first. I mean, people are making their own strategic choices, just like India is, just like every other country is allowed to. And I also joke often that, India really doesn't need to look at the landscape of problems with Bangladesh through the Chinese or the Pakistani lens, because you have your own problems, more than enough of it to deal with. So while on the one hand, we do see the Prime Minister signaling through a political appointee in Dinesh Trivedi as a High Commissioner, elevated to the rank of a cabinet minister the day that he presented his credentials in Bangladesh, that India really is serious and committed to this relationship. On the other hand, you also have the constant domestic factors where there is no restraining, whether it is the statements by Himanta Biswa Sarma in Assam, whether it is the new CM Shubhendu Adhikari in Bengal, particularly on Bangladeshis, on Bangladeshi migrants, illegal immigration. How does India balance these two then?
Look, that's an excellent point. Now, let me start with the appointment of the new High Commissioner, Mr. Dinesh Trivedi, who's a political appointee, empowered now. I think one thing we need to be very clear is that New Delhi is trying to look at Bangladesh not just from a diplomatic, strategic lens, but from a very political lens. This is a marked shift in some senses, but this is also going back to the time when the Congress party used to look at Awami League from a political lens first, rather than just a state-to-state kind of a perspective, right? There is a desire to build political understanding between empowered individuals in the BJP and the BNP, and this is a first step moving forward, in this relationship. The most important thing, in my view, that it does is create a floor of how low can this relationship go, and the floor is very clear as far as India is concerned. There will not be anything, for both countries, they will not try to hurt the national security interests of the other. Whether, historically there was support for all sorts of actors which were violent, that is something that we don't want to go into. The second thing is on the question of minorities, especially as far as Indian sensitivities are concerned. Now, of course, this goes back to the contradictions of how India is dealing with that question, at least in Bengal and Assam.
Oh, yeah. Don't even get me started on that.
but look, the Indian ask historically, right, when I was working on my book, I saw this is not an anxiety that is unique to the BJP. This was an anxiety that was shared by all the governments that came in India from different parts of the country in the 1990s, coalition governments, Congress party, of course, that the safety of Bangladeshi Hindu minority is important because that can have a ricochet on the very kind of fragile social dynamics inside of India, especially Bengal and Assam. And then once these two flows are met, then we can, of course, have a conversation about, good economic relations and we can negotiate connectivity for that matter. So I think that's the first step, and I think that's how I see it. I think this is a party-to-party relationship that is building. There's going to be political understanding. There's direct channel. This will not be refracted through the bureaucracy. And that was actually asked by Dhaka. Dhaka wanted India to send someone who was politically empowered, with whom they can have a political understanding. And the part of the reason is they also saw that, look, if you have a BJP government in West Bengal and if you have a BJP government in Assam, having a direct interlocutor with the cabinet rank in Dhaka, who's got a direct channel to the PMO in Delhi, exactly the kind of rhetoric that is coming in from West Bengal and Assam, you can manage that. And Smita, it's interesting, right? Although the rhetoric that, whether it was during the electoral period, but also afterwards in West Bengal and Assam, there has been unease in Dhaka's political kind of community or the strategic community about these rhetoric. But it has not really shaken the faith of Tarique Rahman's government in the first 4 months about what they want to do with India. And I think it's very important to catch that nuance. I do believe it's very highly likely that behind closed doors, and these are not even back channels, these are front channels, these are proper dialogues, there is a very clear communication happening at a political level of what this actually means. How much is it about Bengal rather than Bangladesh, and what the thresholds are for Bangladesh to be able to accept that. And look, I do not think that all this kind of, whether it's the push-in policy where there are reports of Bangladeshi or people who are being forcefully being sent across the border, whether they are Bangladeshis or not, by from the Indian side in Bengal or Assam, whether it's the rhetoric about Bangladeshis in Bengal with the new government in Calcutta, none of that will fundamentally dislocate the politics of Tarique Rahman and the BNP. We need to be very clear about that. They have the political bandwidth to manage it domestically. They have the kind of strategic bandwidth to have a conversation about it with New Delhi and not let the larger strategic story get dislocated. So that's the politics of this. And again, however, from a distance, this looks as a big issue, and it is an important issue. I think the actual operational dynamics of it are becoming much more nuanced and much more, there's much more communication in that space than meets the eye from the outside. So I would not foresee this suddenly becoming a huge bilateral spat moving forward. There could be, negotiations. There could be difficult negotiations on Ganga Water Treaty and water sharing and Teesta and connectivity, open up the border kind of checkpost and kind of let trade happen. But all that is in the future. And that is a thing of negotiations once the political floor is set. So this is my reading of it, right? I mean, I'm less pessimistic in some senses. However, look, the politics of it, I don't agree with it. Let's be clear about it, right? I don't endorse that kind of politics from the Indian side or in the past when it has happened from the Bangladeshi side. But if I have to put my kind of strategic analysis hat on, this is not a deal breaker.
Right. And that's a good thing to hear. I agree with you because I feel like I know for sure that there were people in Dhaka who thought that, it's a good sign if the BJP is won West Bengal, because Mamata Banerjee seemed to be that hurdle to the Teesta water agreement. And with her gone, perhaps it would be easier for the BJP at the center to make this pact, happen with Assam and West Bengal also ruled by the BJP. And while the issue of minorities' rights is an issue that should concern anybody, who advocates for humanity. I mean, a Hindu minority killed, mob lynched in Bangladesh is as worrisome as India mistreating its own minorities. And I think both countries should have that honest conversation with each other without saying that, oh, because you're raising a finger at me, so I will not talk to you. So that is what reflects maturity in relations, which it's good to see that when Dinesh Trivedi takes charge, that very same day India announces a resumption of the tourist visas. That's another indication, something that had been suspended for the past 2 years. So having said that, Avinash, of course, you said that you don't see these as deal breakers, but we still see this being the conversation point. I mean, India will say you're pushing in Rohingya refugees, you're pushing in illegal immigrants, we are pushing them back. Bangladesh, Hindu minorities are being killed in there. Bangladesh will say that, oh, look at your own minorities. You are ill-treating us. You're calling us parasites and termites. Somewhere the public conversation part of it, is there a way to at least, back channel if they're trying to make sure that these are not deal breakers publicly, because it leads to emotive statements from people. People get played as well on both sides. How do you deal with the public statements?
Look, Smita, that's an excellent point. So what I have been giving you is an analysis of the high geopolitics or the high politics of this relationship. Now, you mentioned that the Dhaka and BNP is happy that there's a BJP government in center and in state in Delhi and that it will help resolve some issues. It will, but it might not as well, right? This is again because a lot of the decisions that, let's say, Mamata Banerjee was taking on issues such as Teesta before, they were keeping in perspective local requirements as well, right? The Calcutta port and other issues. Who gets that water inside of India? That structural reality has not changed. So even Suvendu Adhikari will have to keep in mind that, if you suddenly start making too many concessions on Teesta to Bangladesh, or you start kind of, the amount of water sharing changes, it will have impact on the local ecology, on the local consumption, local demand that can complicate his politics on the ground to a certain degree, if not entirely so. So he will have to either come up with a solution to that at a local level and kind of change the narrative, which perhaps he can. We need to see. But we need to keep in mind that regardless of, even if there's the same party is in both state and center, the logic of the ground, the local logic is still an important thing to keep in mind. So of course, Mamata Banerjee used to use that logic to create standoffs with Delhi when there was a different, because of BJP being in power. That kind of, you might not see that kind of friction at a party political level. But that does not mean that New Delhi will completely overlook what the requirements are on that
Absolutely.
side too. So I think, again, that is to be seen. But yes, at least in terms of having a communication and having a channel and having uniformity of political understanding, that is helpful perhaps from Bangladeshi perspective. Now, in terms of your other point about the lack of public trust. Now, this is this goes back to the very fundamentals of the subcontinent and the fact that this is a subcontinent which is still partitioned. The partition of 1947, the partition of 1971, of course, it was very different context and liberation of Bangladesh.
1905 too, actually, if you look at the Bengal
So
partition.
exactly, I mean, this is again, I mean, that's that was the story of my book. That this is hugely one of the most intricately partitioned, politically partitioned, pieces of real estate on the planet anywhere. It's so deeply intricately partitioned, and and religion is a very important fault line among other fault lines, right? And this is something that the only way to undo that is to have more people to people ties, is to have not just how many number of visas, just let people converse directly with each other. And look, this is where the limits of that rapprochement can be, given the politics of India right now, and given some ground realities of Bangladesh as well right now. So if you ask me that, look, suddenly the political rhetoric in India will overnight change on some of the more sensitive issues and the statements that have been made, let's be very honest about it. That is unlikely to happen anytime soon.
Right.
And whether that will calm the public nerves or the public mood in Bangladesh, that for that very reason is unlikely to happen anytime soon. And that's sad. That's not something I would personally want. That's my personal view. But that's a reality that we are living in that structural context where the people-to-people relationships are limited. There is latent mistrust. There is political capital to be made out of partisanship. You have to deal with that situation and also control it to a certain extent. And that's where the political appointment really kicks in. Do not let those fissures, which neither side can have full control of controlling, and neither, that public mood, do not let that come in the way of the larger bilateral relationship between the two political parties, between the leaders, because leaders and personalities are important in the region, but also between the two states.
Just a final question then, Avinash, to end this conversation. I mean, today with all this conversation around illegal immigration from Bangladesh that has become this thorn in ties, how would you define the Bangladeshi youth landscape to our viewers today? I mean, over the past few decades, we've actually seen Bangladeshi migrants in West Asia, in the Gulf, in Australia, in America. It's been a while since, even if you look at the legal migrants coming into India, that's not remained as a preferred choice. So how do you really define, in terms of a young country, its youth outlook? Where is migration happening? Is illegal immigration an actual thing that's happening from Bangladesh?
So if you go by the Bangladeshi narrative, no. And I can understand why. I mean, a lot of the Bangladeshis today, they, as you suggest, they go to the Gulf, they go to Malaysia, Southeast Asia, Malaysia, huge Bangladeshi community, Singapore. They come to Western countries still. London has a huge historical kind of Bangladeshi diaspora in the US. But look, there are two things happening over here, right? I mean, one thing is the numbers are, in such cases, numbers are almost always disputed. The Indian argument is the number is still very high. Can you somehow verify that? It's very difficult to verify it. But the Bangladeshi narrative and belief is very clear. The number is not that high because people in Bangladesh are not interested in going to India, not in this context. But even that, the kind of migration that we saw earlier, whether it was in the 80s, 90s, 70s, much earlier as well, even till early 2000s, I think that has shifted over the last couple of decades, I would say. That appeal to go, but does that mean there is no migration happening, no displacement happening? No. The numbers remain disputed. And this is where the politics of, that's where it becomes political, right? Once I say it's still too high, this I say it's not. It's very difficult to adjudicate the exact, the exact figures in that setup. in that context, in my view. But in terms of the youth you mentioned, right? Look, Bangladesh is a young country, and a lot of Bangladeshis have, they are very well versed in global vocabularies. They're very well traveled. They know exactly what the place of Bangladesh is in the larger kind of global body politic. And I think that's where you can see the conviction with which the BNP government is saying we want Bangladesh first. You ask the youth of Bangladesh, there would be nothing else. Now, it sounds all very America first and Trumpian in some senses, but Bangladesh is basically trying to say, like other Indian neighbors, that, look, we will be who we are. And if you expect us to kind of behave in a way that any of our big neighbors, whether China or India desires, or the United States, that's not going to happen. And look, that is partly a reflection, forget the regional picture, that's a reflection of where world politics is today as well. There is a lot of assertion of nationalism, assertion of self, protecting your own self, protecting the state, and it fits that trend very much so.
Okay, I think that's a lot of food for thought, and it was interesting. So we kind of went past the scheduled time that we had earlier discussed. But Avinash, this has been absolute pleasure listening into you as you sign out. What are you reading these days? I know you have a paper out in Carnegie on Bangladesh, which I would recommend to the audience as well. But anything interesting, any book interesting that you're reading?
I have actually recently picked up, belatedly I reckon, in this day and age, Apple in China by Patrick McGee.
Okay, and I haven't read that one.
It's fascinating. And after that, I want to read Lords of Finance by Liaquat Ahmed, which is it's a Pulitzer Prize winning book that came out in 2009, which basically tells the history of the 1929-1930 economic financial crash in the West, global financial crash, in fairness, using certain characters which are very pivotal to that story. And yes, I'm really looking forward to reading that one after this.
Okay, lovely. I hope you can go back to some substantial reading, writing. But thank you so much, Avinash Paliwal, for being here on the show. And
thank you.
Thanks to all our viewers. Thanks to all our viewers who tuned in. If you like the content, do share, subscribe to the channel. Thanks, goodbye, take care, and namaskar.